Have you ever noticed how some people become completely silent after getting hurt? No shouting, no tears, no arguments, only an unexpected quietness. Most people assume that silence means they no longer care, but psychology tells a very different story hidden beneath that calm expression. Sometimes the loudest emotional pain isn't expressed through words at all. Instead, it hides behind a simple sentence like, "I'm okay." If you've ever shut down during conflict or struggled to understand someone who suddenly became quiet, this video is for you, because silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's the mind's desperate attempt to survive emotions that suddenly feel too heavy to carry. To understand this behavior, we first need to stop thinking of silence as a personality trait or a conscious decision. When we feel emotionally safe, our brain allows us to explain ourselves, listen carefully, solve problems, and stay connected with other people. But emotional pain changes that balance surprisingly fast, often before we're even aware that our nervous system has shifted into protection mode. Imagine someone you deeply trust suddenly saying something that leaves you feeling rejected, misunderstood, embarrassed, or emotionally abandoned without warning. Your body reacts before your thoughts fully catch up. Breathing changes, muscles tighten, your chest feels heavy, and your mind begins racing. At that moment, finding the right words may become incredibly difficult because your brain is working harder to protect you than communicate. Think of your mind like a crowded highway during rush hour, where every lane suddenly becomes blocked by unexpected emotional traffic. The thoughts are still there, but they can't move freely enough to become calm, meaningful sentences that another person can understand. That's why asking, "Why aren't you saying anything?" often creates even more pressure instead of making communication easier for the quiet person. They're already fighting an invisible battle inside themselves while also feeling expected to explain emotions they haven't fully understood yet. From the outside, their silence may appear cold or distant. Inside, it often feels confusing, exhausting, and emotionally overwhelming all at once. So why do some people become quiet while others immediately express everything they're feeling without hesitation, even during emotionally painful situations? The answer often begins years before today's disagreement, quietly shaped by repeated emotional experiences that taught the brain what feels emotionally safe. No child enters the world believing their feelings should remain hidden, because expressing emotions is one of our earliest and most natural instincts. Children cry when they're scared, laugh loudly when they're happy, and reach for comfort whenever life suddenly feels confusing or overwhelming. But imagine repeatedly hearing phrases like, "Stop crying," "You're too sensitive," or "You're making a big deal out of nothing." Over time, the brain quietly learns that expressing painful emotions may lead to criticism, rejection, embarrassment, or emotional distance instead of comfort. Without realizing it, that child begins replacing honest expression with silence, because silence feels safer than risking another painful emotional response. Years later, during an argument with someone they deeply love, the same protective pattern quietly returns without any conscious decision being made. Their adult mind wants to explain everything clearly, but their nervous system remembers older emotional lessons that still influence present-day reactions. Sometimes childhood isn't the reason at all. The silence begins after painful experiences in relationships where vulnerability repeatedly led to emotional harm. Imagine finally opening your heart to someone only to have your feelings dismissed, twisted, criticized, or used against you later. After enough experiences like that, the brain naturally becomes cautious because honesty no longer feels connected with emotional safety. Eventually, silence begins feeling less dangerous than speaking because every conversation starts carrying the possibility of another emotional wound. From the outside, people may mistake this behavior for emotional distance, while inside, it's simply an attempt to avoid repeating familiar pain. There's another possibility that's often overlooked because not every quiet person has experienced childhood wounds or unhealthy relationships in their past. Some people naturally process emotions internally before they fully understand them, making silence part of their thinking process rather than emotional avoidance. Think about two close friends leaving the same conversation. One immediately starts talking through every emotion, while the other quietly disappears into deep thought. Neither person is handling the situation incorrectly. Their brains simply organize emotional information in completely different ways before reaching meaningful conclusions. Some people discover what they're feeling by speaking out loud, while others need quiet reflection before their emotions begin making complete sense. During emotional conflict, an internal processor often experiences dozens of overlapping thoughts, arriving faster than they can organize into clear language. Imagine trying to solve a complicated puzzle while someone keeps shaking the table every few seconds. Concentration becomes almost impossible to maintain. That's exactly how immediate pressure feels for many quiet people. Their mind isn't empty. It's overloaded with competing emotions and unfinished thoughts. The more they're pushed to respond instantly, the more scattered those thoughts become, making clear communication feel increasingly difficult instead of easier. What looks like avoidance from the outside often feels like emotional traffic inside, where every feeling is waiting for its turn to move. This is why silence should never automatically be confused with emotional indifference. Caring deeply and speaking immediately are not always connected. In fact, many quiet people care so intensely that they become afraid of saying something they'll regret once powerful emotions finally settle down. While everyone else notices the silence, something surprisingly loud is happening inside their mind that rarely becomes visible to other people. The conversation keeps replaying again and again as they analyze every sentence, facial expression, pause, and change in someone's tone of voice. They silently wonder whether they misunderstood something, overreacted, stayed quiet too long, or accidentally hurt someone they genuinely care about. Their mind isn't searching for excuses. It's searching for certainty in a situation that suddenly feels emotionally confusing and painfully uncertain. Ironically, the harder they search for the perfect answer, the more difficult it becomes to find words that truly express how they feel. From the outside, it may seem like nothing is happening. Inside, however, they're carrying an emotional conversation that refuses to become quiet. Another hidden truth often surprises people. Many quiet individuals stay silent because they're trying to protect the relationship rather than damage it with impulsive reactions. When emotions become overwhelming, they recognize that speaking immediately could lead to words fueled by pain instead of genuine understanding or compassion. Rather than allowing temporary anger to create permanent emotional scars, they choose silence until their thoughts become calmer and more balanced. From the outside, this pause can easily look like emotional withdrawal, but internally it's often an act of emotional self-control and responsibility. Unfortunately, their silence creates another challenge because the people around them rarely understand what that quietness actually represents beneath the surface. When someone suddenly stops talking, the human brain naturally begins filling the empty space with its own fearful assumptions and worst-case stories. Thoughts like, "They're ignoring me," "They don't love me anymore," or "They're planning to leave," quickly begin taking control of the situation. None of those assumptions may be true, but uncertainty often feels more frightening than knowing the actual reason behind someone's silence. This creates a painful emotional cycle where one person desperately seeks reassurance, while the other desperately needs time and emotional breathing space. The more one person follows, questions, or demands immediate answers, the more overwhelmed the quiet person's nervous system begins feeling. At the very same time, the more the quiet person withdraws, the more abandoned, anxious, and emotionally rejected the other person becomes. Neither person is trying to hurt the other. Both are simply responding to emotional fear, using completely different survival strategies they never consciously chose. One nervous system searches for closeness to restore safety, while the other searches for temporary distance to regain emotional balance and clear thinking. Without understanding these opposite emotional needs, even loving couples can become trapped in repeating the exact same painful conflict again and again. Breaking this pattern doesn't begin with finding better arguments or smarter explanations. It begins with helping both people feel emotionally safe again. Because genuine communication rarely happens when two frightened nervous systems are protecting themselves instead of truly listening to each other. When someone feels emotionally overwhelmed, they rarely need perfect advice. What they usually need first is the feeling that they're emotionally safe exactly as they are. Safety doesn't always come from solving the problem immediately. Sometimes it begins with knowing nobody is forcing them to explain impossible feelings too quickly. Imagine trying to calm a frightened bird by chasing it through the room. The faster you move, the further it flies away. Human emotions often work in surprisingly similar ways because pressure rarely creates openness when someone already feels emotionally overwhelmed and vulnerable. A simple sentence like, "Take your time. I'm here whenever you're ready," can completely change how the nervous system experiences that difficult moment. Those words communicate something deeper than reassurance. They quietly tell the other person's brain that connection still exists despite the uncomfortable silence. As emotional pressure begins fading away, breathing slowly becomes steadier, muscles relax, and thoughts gradually organize themselves into understandable language again. Real conversations usually happen after emotional safety returns, not while someone still feels trapped inside emotional survival mode. If you're someone who naturally becomes quiet when you're hurt, it's important to remember that needing space isn't something you should feel guilty about. Your silence doesn't automatically mean you're emotionally unavailable, uncaring, or incapable of building healthy and meaningful relationships with other people. However, there's one important responsibility that comes with needing emotional space during difficult moments, especially when someone genuinely cares about you. The people who love you cannot always tell whether you're processing emotions, protecting yourself, or quietly preparing to walk away forever. Without even realizing it, they begin filling those unanswered questions with fears that may have nothing to do with reality at all. That's why one honest sentence can prevent hours or even days of unnecessary misunderstanding, anxiety, and emotional distance between two caring people. You don't need to explain everything immediately. You only need to let the other person know that your silence isn't the end of the relationship. Even saying, "I'm overwhelmed right now. I need some quiet before I can explain myself," can become a powerful bridge back to connection. If you're trying to support someone who becomes quiet when they're hurt, remember that patience often communicates love more clearly than constant questioning ever could. Giving someone space doesn't mean giving up on them. It means trusting that healing sometimes happens in silence before meaningful words can appear. Of course, healthy silence has limits. Space should become a bridge back to conversation, not a permanent escape from every difficult emotion. When days or weeks pass without reconnecting, silence slowly stops protecting the relationship and begins creating emotional walls between two people. The goal isn't avoiding conflict forever. The goal is returning with a calmer mind that's capable of honesty instead of emotional survival. Healthy relationships aren't built by people who never experience misunderstandings. They're built by people who keep finding their way back after difficult moments. Sometimes returning begins with a heartfelt apology. Sometimes it begins with careful listening. Sometimes it begins with simply saying, "I'm ready to talk now." That small moment of reconnection may seem ordinary, but it quietly rebuilds trust that emotional storms don't have to destroy meaningful relationships forever. Over time, both people begin learning something incredibly valuable. Silence doesn't have to create fear when it's followed by honesty, patience, and genuine understanding. The quiet person discovers they can ask for space without disappearing emotionally, while their loved ones learn that waiting isn't the same as being rejected. This creates a healthier pattern where both nervous systems gradually stop seeing disagreement as danger and start seeing it as something they can navigate together. Perhaps the most beautiful truth is that quiet people often speak with extraordinary sincerity once they finally find the right words to express themselves. Their thoughts aren't rushed. Their feelings aren't impulsive. They've been carefully examined before they're shared with someone they deeply trust. In a world that often rewards instant reactions, thoughtful silence can become a reminder that not every meaningful response needs to happen immediately. The strongest relationships aren't created by talking every second. They're created when both people feel emotionally safe enough to be completely themselves. So the next time someone grows unusually quiet after being hurt, don't immediately assume they're pushing you away. They may simply be searching for the safest path back to you. If today's video helped you understand silence through a different perspective, remember that empathy often begins where quick judgments finally come to an end. Before you leave, take a quiet moment to reflect on your own emotional patterns instead of judging them. Awareness is always the first step toward meaningful change. Ask yourself one simple question. When I'm hurt, am I protecting my peace, or am I slowly building walls that keep everyone outside? There's an important difference between healthy silence that creates space for healing and unhealthy silence that quietly disconnects people who genuinely care about each other. The more we understand our emotional habits, the easier it becomes to replace automatic survival responses with intentional choices that strengthen trust instead of weakening it. Likewise, when we understand someone else's silence, we become less likely to chase them with pressure and more likely to approach them with patience. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't finding the perfect words. It's creating an environment where difficult words eventually feel safe enough to be spoken. Emotional maturity isn't measured by how quickly someone responds during conflict. It's measured by how honestly and respectfully they reconnect afterward. Every healthy relationship will experience misunderstandings, emotional storms, and uncomfortable silence. What matters most is learning how to find each other again. Remember, silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's where courage quietly gathers strength before finally finding the words it has been searching for. If this video helped you understand yourself or someone you love, share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience may comfort someone feeling misunderstood today. Until next time, be patient with your own heart, be gentle with the hearts of others, and remember that understanding almost always begins before the first word is spoken.
Stop chasing motivation. Start understanding your mind. Subscribe to Inner Violet and learn how to think, not just react.